a recognisable aesthetic to arcade games from the late 70s and early 80s. The scrolling sprites, the bright colours, the bleeps and bloops of synthesised music and sound effects, maybe interspersed with the occasional bit of digitised speech. It's all very samey. That is, until 1983, when a brand new game hits arcades, offering an experience unlike any other game of its time.
I'm talking, of course, about Dragon's Lair, which featured beautifully animated characters and stunningly rendered backgrounds just like you'd see at the movies or on TV. It was a living, breathing cartoon, and what's more, it was a cartoon where you controlled the outcome.
It was technically impressive, insofar as playing video off of a laserdisc and using what is essentially a glorified remote control to determine the outcome of predefined events can be considered impressive, but it was very, very popular and amassed a strong following of people who all grew up to become the sort of person who thinks that quick-time events in video games are a good idea. I'll let that one sink in for a minute.
Succeeding at Dragon's Lair is very much dependent upon remembering which direction to press and when, which makes it quite probably the most unnecessarily complicated version of Simon ever made. But get it right and you're rewarded with some very pretty animation, in much the same way that a kidnapping victim who stops mouthing off to their captors is rewarded with not being urinated upon.
Dragon's Lair is... well, it's shit, isn't it? It's a shit game. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. It's pretty, it's very pretty to look at, but it's frustrating and tedious and predicated almost entirely around split-second timing that you can't possibly know about unless you've got a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of patience. It's shit. It's a shit game, and anyone who says otherwise is lying, either to you or to themselves.
This shit didn't remain confined to the arcades either. There were, and continue to be, a number of simplified yet faithfully shit home ports of Dragon's Lair on systems like the Commodore 64, the Amiga, the Philips CDI, and more recently the Wii and Windows-based PCs, and it's even been released for bog-standard DVD and Blu-ray players as an interactive game you play with your remote control. There were also two platform game adaptations, one for the NES, which somehow manages to be even more annoying than the arcade version, you may have seen the angry video game nerds scream at this one, and one for the Super Nintendo, which is more of a traditional platform game but is still, by and large, shit.
Eventually, someone decided they wanted to complete the circle and provide the means for people to play Dragon's Lair while they were taking a shit, and so in 2000, the entire game was squeezed down onto a Game Boy Color cartridge. Slightly too big to flush, unfortunately.
The Game Boy Color port strives to be as faithful a port as possible, which actually works against it. The game is a flurry of blurred, muddled imagery being displayed on a very small, low-resolution screen, which actually makes it very difficult to follow. If you're playing this on a Game Boy Color or an Advance, you'll have a tough time following the action, and if you're playing this on a GameCube using the Game Boy Player, what the hell is wrong with you?
This version of the game is unforgiving, perhaps even more so than the original arcade version. Mess up your timing by even a fraction of a second and you're dead. And you're going to die a lot too, I mean that's not even up for debate. Dragon's Lair has always been a game for people who like the bitter, ashen taste of defeat in their mouths, and the Game Boy Color version not only allows you to take that flavour with you on the go, but also goes to great pains to ensure you get to taste it as often as possible.
Apparently, even the developers think that the game is an exercise in unwanted molestation because they saw fit to include a tutorial mode which tells you when to press which button in an effort to train you in the ways of the QuickTime event. It fails spectacularly, of course, often throwing up prompts ever so slightly too late for you to register them, but the effort is appreciated.
Well, I say appreciated, but even with the prompts, it's still a maddening assault on the senses, taking place far too quickly and on far too small a screen for you to really process what's happening. It also doesn't help that the only way to know what you're supposed to do in much of the game is to already have done it. Honestly, why do people even like this game?
All in all, the Game Boy Color port of Dragon's Lair is annoying, tedious, and hard to follow, which means it's a pretty faithful port all round.
Of course, there are better ways of playing Dragon's Lair on the go these days if you want to expose yourself to that kind of interminable torment. It used to be available for the iPhone and the iPad, but it was pulled by some wonderful, wonderful person who I would like to kiss passionately on the mouth. Unfortunately, it is still available for the 3DS, where it can be purchased on the Nintendo eShop.
The DS version obviously looks much better than the Game Boy Color version and retains the option to see which button you should press and when, but it still suffers from some flaws, such as the fact that it's Dragon's Lair.
You can buy it right now. Please don't. Please don't buy Dragon's Lair. You're better than that.